Greetings, it's your host, Gabe Morales, returning for our coverage of Mexican Mafia members over the past 60 plus years. Today in part 3, we are going to cover the rest of the M last names, and I have a lot of individuals left, so I'm going to have to skip over a few of them and try to pick them up after I'm done with the Z's. I don't have enough time to get in a lot of detail on a lot of these guys, and probably will even have to do special episodes. But if you're interested in learning more about these guys, you can always read my book, The History of the Mexican Mafia, available on Amazon.com. And I'll show that once again at the end. First, I'm going to talk about an individual, either a camarada or maybe he is a member, given a heads up that he had been very active in the San Fernando Valley, which, as you guys know, has been off the hook lately. That individual is Victor Little Cocho Mendes, who had an AA number 2665 and was housed at Kern Valley, but presently is at Corcoran. Then there was Anthony Huayno Mendiola, who was from San Diego. I show he was involved in a homicide in 1996, and I believe he was made MA sometime after. He was housed at Pelican Bay for many years and also spent quite a bit of time at the San Diego County Jail, but I show is currently not in custody. There was Charles Sapo Mendoza from Rancho San Pedro. I understand that he was a shot caller and climbed up the MA ladder, being associated from Donald Stoney Galas, also from Rancho San Pedro. I understand they were crime partners. I was told that he was made in the feds in the late 70s, but got out and overdosed in the LA County Jail in 2005. There was Peter Smiley Mendoza from Florencia. I understand he was MA in the 1970s. I showed he was at CMF in Vacaville in 1972. He had a C number, 7719, and also was housed at Lancaster in 2016, but is currently not in custody. Then we have Ramon Angel Mendoza from Barrio Nueva Estrada. I've met Mundo in person. We sat right next to each other at arm's length and discussed some things concerning La M at a social before a gang training in the Midwest many years ago. I have to make it clear here, I've had a few prior problems with some of his narratives, and I'm sure he heard some bad chisme about me from members of the prison gang task force who did not like my mentor, Robert Moco Morel, especially Mundo's handler, Chile. But I'm not going to get all into that. I'm going to try to be a good Christian. If you want to hear about that, it is explained in detail in Moco's book, The Traffic Stop. To his credit, Mundo has put out some very good stories about La M on TV and on the internet over the years. If you read his book, From Altar Boy to Hitman, he talks about how he was once a Catholic altar boy, but eventually joined his gang VNE and was very close to his homeboy, Eddie Sailor Boy Gonzalez. And they participated in many crimes together as members of the Mexican Mafia. He and Sailor Boy were eventually locked up in the Kern County Jail. It was during that time that Mundo felt that there was divine intervention by God because they got off that case due to lack of a speedy trial. Mundo decided to work undercover for a short time period, then went into WITSEG, but eventually left that program for reasons I'll let him explain. There was Johnny Conejo Mercado out of Azusa. I show he had an H number, 92413. He hit CDC right about the time I left in 1993. Sometime after that period, he was made MA and confined at Corcoran in 2016, and recently has been housed at Centinela over the last few years. There was Victor Gator, a.k.a. Scooter Mesa, from Florencia. I understand he was involved in several homicides, including that of a guy named Pencas Martinez in August of 1980 in San Bernardino County. There was Victor Beaver Minjares from the Avenues. He was responsible for at least half a dozen homicides and had a B number, 20446. He was very active at Folsom Prison in the 1970s and also was present when Robot Salas and Spider Arriaga killed Benito Romero from the Nuestra Familia. Understand that Beaver was housed at the LA County Jail in 1977 and died sometime in the 1980s. There was Carlos Pico, a.k.a. Zopili Miranda. He was incarcerated in the California Youth Authority in the late 1970s. He was released and committed a robbery in 1986, whereby he gained his D number, 22153. He was housed at CMC in 1988 and got out and committed a bank robbery, whereby he had a BOP number of 9271212. I show that he was housed in Phoenix in the BOP, and I show he was released from the BOP in September 2004, but a few months later committed a drive-by shooting. I believe he was off parole in 2012, and I'm unsure what he has been up to in recent years. There's Carlos Chico Molina from Pacas. He had a C number, 67392, and I understand was made MAs in the late 70s or early 80s. He was housed at Pelican Bay for many years and then shipped off to Lancaster and is presently incarcerated at Kern Valley State Prison. There's Raul Molina Garcia from Westside Wilmas. He had a D number, 26628, and was made MA by the late 1980s. He also was housed at Pelican Bay for many years, then was shipped off to DVI in 2021, and currently is housed at SADF in Corcoran. Somebody asked me about a Paul Montanez, who has a Theo from the Carmona family out of Orange County. I couldn't find a lot on this guy, but I mentioned him because you asked. I will try to research him more later and see what I can dig up. There's Daniel Choco Montiano Chavez. I think he was out of Maravilla, but I'm not sure. He was housed in McNeil Island Prison in 1973, then was incarcerated in CDC in the mid-70s with B number 62869. He got out in February of 1977 and participated in multiple homicides on behalf of the inmate, including that of George Pollo Felix down in Rosemead, as well as Jerry Youngster Granillo in Visalia, who was killed in 1979 by Choco, and Gilbert Roybal in Fresno. Choco Montiano had a girlfriend who was a Fresno judge, and it is suspected that the MA compromised her. Here he is seen in the surveillance next to Calote Amador and Güero Shai Rock, while there was a major Mexican Mafia meeting in a park that was under surveillance by the prison gang task force. Choco committed a bank robbery in 1979 and was sent to Marion. He then got released and entered CDC on a C number, 45611. He was housed at DVI in 1988 when he paroled in April of that year. My understanding is that he overdosed down in TJ in 1988. There was Robert Bobby Montenegro. I thought he was out of Maravilla, but I also have notes that he had connections to Brole and also was connected to the Ariano Felix organization down in Baja. Bobby had a C number, 63849, and he's another one that I remember from New Folsom Prison, and even some of the guards from Old Folsom talking about him being a shot caller. He then was moved to Pelican Bay, and I believe was housed there as of 2012, but is currently housed at California State Prison, Los Angeles County, located in Lancaster. There was Raul Dopey Montes from 38th Street, which is an old gang that goes back to the Zoot Suit days. He had an A number 47949, was born in 1938. I show that he was housed at San Quentin in 1968 during the Shoe War and was engaged in battle with the Nuestra Familia. I understand that he dropped out in the late 1970s and disappeared off the radar. There's Fast Freddy Montoya out of Richmond. I've heard some people say that he was first on Norteño and that he used a lot of inner city black jargon and still does, since he's from Richmond. He had a lot of sway over Northern California, especially in the Bay Area. He paroled from CDC in February 2012 and then was indicted on a RICO case in August 2013. Last I heard, he is still deep in the mix. There's George Carroll Morales out of LA, who supposedly had Cosa Nostra connections and was involved in some major dope deals with Joe Morgan in the late 1970s, who I'll talk about here shortly. Another individual subscriber brought up was Juan Pelon Morales out of Clanton. I didn't have enough time to research him either, but I heard that he was an Old Folsom around 2000 to 2004 and had a big M on his chest with the Águila, which is known to be a Mexican Mafia symbol. I'll see if I can't find more on Juan Pelon Morales later when I don't get so busy, if that ever happens. There was Tony Blackie Morales out of Bolin Parque. He was popped on a firearms charge in 1978, where he caught his B number, 91730. Paroled in 1982, but caught a violation shortly after, and paroled again in 1985. He was convicted of grand theft in 86 and incarcerated for a couple more years, then paroled in 1988. He then committed a bank robbery in 1991 and was housed at Florence in 1993, as well as Marion 2003 to 2005. And I show was released in March of 2011. There was a Thief Morales out of Compton Tortilla Flats. He had a K number 61268. I show was housed at Corcoran, but is currently not in custody. And by the way, none of these Morales are related to me, as far as I know, just in case you're wondering. There was Anthony Dito Moreno, who I've talked about previously in a couple episodes. He was one of the victims in the Maxon Road massacre, whereby he was discovered by Güero Shai Rock, who just so happened to move very close by and put the word out to have him hit, and recruited Pelon Maciel to get together a hit team. They killed Dito as well as Tito Aguirre from 18th Street, who happened to be at the house, as well as Dito's sister and two of her small children, all of which did not go over well with La M. There was Armando Frijol, a.k.a. Mando Moreno, at Orange County Hard Times, but they found out later that he had been claiming Crip in his younger days. He first had an H number, 6891. He was involved at a riot at CIM in 2009 and paroled shortly after, whereby he engaged in a war on the streets with Sano Ojeda to take over Orange County. Although he had a lot of younger players backing him up, he lost that war against Sano, especially when the word came out that he had been claiming Crip in his younger days. Then we have the Moreno family from Norwalk, but they also had ties to Sanger up by Fresno, especially in later years. There was Eddie Pelon Moreno, who was active in the MA in San Quentin prison in 1963, whereby he was involved in the murder of an individual named Tony Chacon. Chacon was from Maravilla, and his brother also happened to be from Maravilla. A lot of people don't know it, but this homicide was one of the reasons why several of the Maravillas later broke off from La M, and some even joined the Nuestra Familia, which started in secrecy around 1965, and then, of course, had their big coming out party in September of 1968. He was housed at the California Conservation Center in October 1972 with Sleepy Bentoncourt, and together they murdered Nuestra Familia members Diamond Miranda and Bullwinkle Medina. I understand that he was housed in San Quentin's Adjustment Center in early 1973. He died, but is still very much revered by the M. Carnales. His brother, Jesse Jr., was also known as Pelon. Pelon also had an Aztec code name, as many of these guys do. I understand his was Tecuani. Native Nahua speakers use Tecuani to describe a certain class of living creatures, non-humans that bite. Jesse was locked up in 1956 as a juvenile and sent to CRC in 1961, when he would have been about 22 years old and would have had an N number. He paroled in 1963, but then came back several times to CRC during the 1960s and in 1971. He paroled again in 71, but then was popped on a robbery case in 74, which gave him a B number, 61225. He paroled after a couple of years, but then committed another robbery, which got him a C number, 2450. Eventually, he was popped on a RICO case and given life without. He was sent to the ADX and also did some time at Florence High. He was housed at Beaumont, Texas, when the MS attacked several Mexican Mafia members and associates. And I understand that the initial target was actually Jesse. Since that time, Jesse Pelon Moreno has been housed at Springfield, which is usually used as a medical facility. He is getting up there in age and is currently 84 years old. Then there is Michael Boo Moreno. He was born in 1957 and I understand became affiliated with the MA in the late 70s or early 80s. He had a C number, 80854, and was housed at multiple CDC facilities, including Corcoran. Also understand that he had a rep in the Kern County Jail that ran business for him. Mike Boo has his hands all over the place. Like I said, the Moreno family has connections in Norwalk and Sanger and even down in Mexico. I don't get much into current politics, but supposedly he was one of the individuals that warned Evil to back off some of the things he was involved in. And they fought over taxing in Ventura County. I will say, only because it's out in the press already, Evil's body was found in Rosarito, Mexico, on the beach. The circumstances are still under investigation, so I can't talk about it any more than that. Mike Boo was held at the Metro Detention Center in 2022 and pled guilty, including being involved in the taxation of Ventura County. I showed that he was released from the feds in February 2023. Then there's Peter Peep Boy Moreno. I talked a little bit about that in the last episode when I was describing Ernesto Martinez. Peep Boy is still good in the Arizona MA and in the California MA. He has been housed in Arizona DOC for many years now. There's also Thomas Bug Moreno, who I made the mistake of insinuating that he may have dropped out. Actually, I believe that was one of his offspring, and I quickly cleared that up. I do make mistakes sometimes. Sometimes I don't check the DOB, or like I said, sometimes I'll quote the last known address instead of their original video. But hey, I'm tracking a lot of guys. I'm trying to do the best I can here. Thomas Moreno did a drive-by shooting in 1976 in the LA area and was locked up in the Youth Authority. He paroled in 1977. He then was involved in multiple robberies in Sanger in the late 70s through 1980s. and also involved in an attempted murder case. He then was incarcerated in CDC with C number 21661. He paroled in 1981, but committed another robbery in 83, whereby he got a new C number 77895. He was housed at San Quentin in 86, as well as Folsom, and paroled in 1988. It was in that year that he committed a bank robbery, and I believe was the first time he was sent to the feds on 525-08097. Understand that Bug did a hit in the feds in May of 2004 and was sent to Victorville in February 2005. He also was housed at the San Bernardino County Jail in 2006. I believe in regards to criminal activity that took place at USP Victorville, which is located in San Bernardino County. He then was moved to ADX, where he has been housed for at least over a decade now. He is scheduled for release in June 2030. There was Jesse Patrick Moreno Casares, who is not related to the other Morenos. He's out of San Diego County, Pozole, which is a barrio located right outside the gates of Oceanside, California, whereby I attended multiple parties attended by gang members from Pozole and friendly barrios back in the early 80s. Understand that Jesse Moreno committed a burglary in 1975 and in 1979, which got him sent to CRC for a couple of years, whereby he had an N number. He paroled in 1982 and then was sent back to CRC. He caught his C number 40543 in 1981. He paroled in 1982 and then was sent back to CRC in 84. He paroled in 88 but got popped for a forgery beef. He paroled in 1992 but then got involved in some meth cells and was sent to the feds and housed at Leavenworth. Also show that he was indicted on a RICO case and housed at the ADX in 2003 and 2004. I believe he dropped out in the feds and was finally released in May 2010 and then disappeared. Then we have Joseph Radich Morgan, also known as Coco Locio, and Papa Joe. He did not like being called Pegleg, as I've heard some people say. I could say so much about Joe. My mentor arrested him 3 times, so he told me quite a bit about Joseph Morgan. Joe Morgan was born in April 1929 in San Pedro, California, and was Croatian. Later on, he moved to an area claimed by Ford Moravia in East LA. Growing up in San Pedro as well as East LA, Morgan became very fluent in Spanish. In 1946, he beat the husband of his 32-year-old girlfriend to death with a mallet and buried the body in a shallow grave. He was soon identified as a suspect. He was arrested, but before the trial started, he escaped from custody in 1946 and remained a fugitive for several months before being recaptured. He was tried and convicted. A lot of people have brought up that he testified against his lover, who had convinced him to kill her husband. But this lady also testified against Joe. So it was like a he said, she said, and it was very public in the newspaper. It was no secret that has recently come out, whereby Joe Morgan was pegged as being a rat. He was a young teenager at the time, was just trying to protect himself because the cops were getting ready to send him away for a long time. In fact, I understand he was the youngest inmate ever housed at San Quentin when he was only 17 years old after he was convicted for that crime. He was paroled in 1955, but returned to prison for an armed robbery he committed in West Covina, whereby he got away with approximately $17,000. Inside prison, Morgan had ties to not only Mexican inmates, but also the Aryan Brotherhood and Cosa Nostra. He also had ties to the drug cartels and individuals like dope kingpin Harry Gamboa Buckley down in Rosarito, Mexico. Moco told me that Cheyenne Cadena put the title of honorary godfather on him in 1970, shortly after he joined, so that he could make deals with the Mexican drug cartels. Now, I know some people claim that Morgan slept on floors of garages and on couches, but while he was no millionaire, he was no bum either. Morgan stood 6'2" and always dressed sharp on the street and had a cool walk, a ditty bop, probably mostly due to his prosthetic leg. After the West Covina robbery, Morgan was captured in Long Beach shortly after the heist, but he escaped custody yet again in 1961 with several other inmates he's incarcerated with in the LA County Jail. He was recaptured 4 days later on that escape. Morgan eventually joined Leme in the late 1960s. Morgan continued to be very powerful on the street and often eliminated his competition. In November 1975, Morgan was arrested by Robert Mocha Morel and sent back to prison on a parole violation. In July 1977, Joe Morgan was captured in California after he was found out that he had bought a gun in Utah and had traveled through several western states, including Oregon. He caught a charge of interstate trafficking firearms. that were added to his narcotics fugitive warrants he was already facing. This was enough to bring him federal BOP time, and he was housed at Marion with Aryan Brotherhood members and MN members like Donald Stoney Galas, as seen here. For more on Joe Morgan, you can refer to the Artie Guzman case, whereby I explain how Mundo's brother was the driver in a hit that went down, coordinated by Joe Morgan on the husband of a bail agent who wanted him eliminated. Mundo ended up testifying against Joe Morgan on that case and many others involving the Mexican Mafia. I escorted Joe Morgan into the Violence Control Unit on May 10, 1992, shortly after this picture was taken in R&R. Eventually, Papa Joe was shipped back to Pelican Bay, and then later on down to Corcoran to undergo medical treatment. He died of liver cancer in October of 1993. There is Frank Littleman Munoz from Westside Wilmas. He caught a couple B numbers for robberies in the late 1970s. He also caught a C number, 55071, for a robbery committed in 1982. He was active at Old Folsom from 1983 to 85, and also show was at San Quentin in 1988. He committed a bank robbery in 1989 and was housed at Lompoc in 1991. He later was moved to the ADX for many years, but was released in June 2013. There was Victorio Murillo from Visalia. He was very involved with the MN in the 1970s and had a couple of B numbers. In later years, he became an ally of Fox Tapia and was engaged in a war against Chuy Martinez. Tati Torres was also caught up in this mess, which is kind of strange because Victorio and his wife Jenny and Tati Torres and his wife at one time were good friends. Vic was finally killed by Charles Woody and Eddie Enchanette. That whole case was a very messy one. A lot of webs entangled in that one. So hopefully I didn't confuse you there. I know I went pretty fast on some of those guys, what I was able to put out. Like I said, I'm going to take a little break for a little while, pause for the cause, while I get out some content that has been on hold for a while. After that, I will continue with Mexican Mafia members over the last 60 plus years, starting with the letter N through the letter Z. For now, this is Gabe Morales signing off for Gangsters, Cops, and Politicians.